this episode, we are going to narrow our focus to the very beginning of most cloud incidents, which is the initial access phase. Because if you can recognize how attackers first get in, you dramatically improve your ability to stop them early. Initial access is not usually dramatic or cinematic. It is often simple, opportunistic, and based on common mistakes. Public cloud environments introduce specific exposure patterns that attackers repeatedly exploit, especially around identity, configuration, and public-facing services. When you understand these patterns, you stop thinking of breaches as mysterious events and start seeing them as predictable outcomes of weak controls. The goal here is to calmly walk through the most common entry paths so you can mentally connect them to the defensive measures that matter most. By the end, initial access should feel like a set of recognizable doors rather than an invisible threat. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. One of the most frequent initial access paths in public cloud environments is compromised credentials, especially those protected only by passwords. Attackers obtain credentials through phishing, credential stuffing, password reuse from unrelated breaches, or simple guessing against weak accounts. Once valid credentials are acquired, attackers can log in through normal authentication channels, which makes detection harder because the access appears legitimate at first glance. Cloud management consoles and programmatic access interfaces are both attractive entry points when credentials are exposed. If multi-factor authentication is not enforced consistently, password compromise becomes a direct path into the environment. This is why identity security is often the first and most emphasized layer of cloud defense. Another common entry path involves exposed access keys and tokens, especially those accidentally embedded in code repositories or configuration files. Developers sometimes store credentials and scripts for convenience, and if those scripts are shared publicly or pushed to version control systems without proper controls, attackers can discover and reuse them. Cloud access keys often grant programmatic access that bypasses interactive login protections, making them particularly valuable to adversaries. Once obtained, these keys can be used quietly to enumerate resources and test permissions. Because keys may not require additional authentication factors, their exposure can be especially damaging. Understanding this pattern reinforces the importance of secret management and regular key rotation. Publicly exposed services represent another significant initial access vector in cloud environments. When organizations deploy applications or services and leave them reachable from the internet without adequate protection, attackers can scan and probe those endpoints at scale. Automated scanning tools continuously search for misconfigured services, outdated software, or unnecessary open ports. If a vulnerability is found, attackers may exploit it to gain a foothold inside the cloud account. Even if the service itself is secure, weak authentication or default credentials can provide entry. Recognizing that anything exposed publicly will be discovered quickly is fundamental to realistic cloud defense. Misconfigured storage resources are also frequent starting points for attackers. Public cloud storage services are designed for flexible sharing, but misapplied permissions can accidentally make sensitive data accessible to anyone on the internet. Attackers routinely scan for publicly accessible storage buckets or file repositories and inspect their contents for valuable information. Sometimes the goal is direct data theft, while other times exposed data reveals credentials, configuration details, or internal architecture that can be used to enable deeper compromise. This pattern illustrates how convenience features, when misused, create unintentional entry points. Proper access control and validation processes are essential to prevent this type of exposure. Phishing remains a powerful initial access method even in cloud-centric environments. Attackers may target employees with convincing emails designed to capture login credentials or trick them into approving malicious authentication requests. Because cloud accounts are often accessible from anywhere, a single successful phishing attempt can grant broad access. Modern phishing techniques may even bypass basic protections by exploiting human behavior rather than technical weaknesses. When users are not trained to recognize suspicious prompts or unusual login flows, the risk increases significantly. This makes user awareness and strong authentication mechanisms key components of initial access prevention. Federated identity and trust relationships introduce additional initial access complexity. Organizations often connect cloud environments to corporate identity providers for single sign-on convenience. If the corporate identity system is compromised, attackers may inherit access to connected cloud services automatically. In this case, the initial access does not originate within the cloud itself, but flows through a trusted integration. This highlights that cloud security is not isolated from broader enterprise security posture. When trust relationships are not carefully managed and monitored, they become indirect entry paths that attackers can exploit. Another common access path involves overly permissive network configurations. Public cloud platforms allow flexible networking, but misconfigured security groups or firewall rules can unintentionally expose internal services. Attackers scan for open management ports, such as remote administration interfaces, and attempt to brute force or exploit them. Even if the service was meant only for internal use, a small configuration mistake can make it globally reachable. Because cloud networking is software-defined, these misconfigurations can propagate quickly if templates are reused without validation. Recognizing the fragility of network exposure settings helps defenders treat them with appropriate caution. Compromised third-party integrations can also serve as initial access vectors. Many cloud environments integrate with external tools for monitoring, automation, analytics, or collaboration. If a third-party service with delegated access is breached, attackers may pivot through that integration into the cloud account. These integrations often use tokens or service accounts with broad permissions, making them attractive targets. Organizations sometimes overlook the security posture of these external connections, assuming they are inherently safe. Understanding that delegated trust expands the attack surface is essential for threat-aware design. Another path that attackers use involves social engineering directed at support processes. In some cases, attackers may attempt to manipulate help desk or account recovery procedures to gain control of privileged accounts. If identity verification processes are weak or inconsistently applied, social engineering can bypass technical safeguards. Public cloud accounts often rely on email addresses or administrative contacts for recovery and verification, which can become targets themselves. This form of access reminds us that security is not purely technical. Process weaknesses can create entry points as well. Strong governance and consistent procedures are therefore part of initial access defense. Attackers may also exploit outdated or unused resources left running in the cloud. Test environments, abandoned projects, or forgotten virtual machines sometimes remain accessible long after they are needed. These systems may not receive updates or monitoring, making them easier to compromise. Once breached, they can provide a foothold for exploring the broader environment. The elasticity of cloud environments makes it easy to create resources, but without disciplined lifecycle management, those resources become silent liabilities. Regular review and cleanup are crucial to prevent this type of overlooked entry point. Automation itself can become an access vector if not properly secured. Continuous integration and deployment pipelines often have permissions to modify infrastructure or deploy code. If attackers compromise pipeline credentials or configuration, they can inject malicious changes that grant further access. Because automated systems are trusted by design, malicious activity within them can be especially damaging. Protecting pipeline credentials and validating changes are therefore essential steps in limiting initial access risk. Understanding that automation is both a strength and a vulnerability helps you treat it with appropriate security controls. Ultimately, tracking common initial access paths in public cloud environments helps transform uncertainty into awareness. Credential compromise, exposed keys, public services, misconfigured storage, phishing, trust relationships, weak network controls, third-party integrations, social engineering, neglected resources, and automation misuse are recurring patterns. None of these are exotic or rare. They are practical and frequently observed. When you recognize these patterns, You can design controls and monitoring that directly address them rather than guessing at abstract threats. On the exam, this awareness allows you to quickly identify which scenario describes an initial access vector and which control best interrupts it. In practice, it allows you to strengthen your cloud posture at the most critical stage of an attack lifecycle, where early prevention has the greatest impact.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.